But the subject of today's message is a very simple question. Here's the question. Where did Negroes come from? Where did Negroes come from? That's the question for today's message. Now I hope that y'all don't be a little disappointed if I don't turn to a Bible verse today, because in finding the answer to this question, there's not a verse in the Bible to address this question. But yet it's a reality that we are all faced with. Where did Negroes come from? The subject is asked in the past tense. Where did Negroes, where did they come from? But I will try to address this question not only in the past tense, but also in the present tense, which would be, where do Negroes come from? In the war for the liberation, and when I say liberation, brothers and sisters, I mean salvation. Because actually, in the biblical text, the word saved is the Greek word sozo, S-O-Z-O, which means to be liberated, to be made to stand upright. So in the war for the salvation or the liberation of our people, there's one thing that we must always remember, and that is we are at war. Did y'all hear what I said? Repeat it after me. We are at war. When are we at war? Look at the person next to you and say, all the time. All the time. Right now. Tonight. Yesterday. Tomorrow. When you wake up in the morning. When you get ready to go to bed tonight. When you get ready to sit down to eat dinner. Remember, we are at war. What does it mean to be at war? A lot of people say that they're at war, but they have no idea of what it means to be at war. To be at war means to be in a declared or open conflict with some other entity or someone else. To be at war means to be in a struggle against someone else. To be at war means to have contention between you and someone else. To be at war means to be in opposition to another with the purpose of defeating, destroying, or neutralizing the ability of your opponent to resist your power and control. That's what it means to be at war. And whether y'all realize it or not, there is something working through someone or some people who are at war trying to neutralize you. Trying to neutralize me. Trying to remove from us that which empowers us. Are y'all following me? Now I'm going to drop something on you now about the warfare. The most dangerous person, hear me well, The most dangerous person in a war is the person who is a traitor. Did y'all hear me? Yes. The traitor is the most dangerous person in warfare. Why is it? Because a traitor is a person who commits treason. And how do they do that? By violating the trust and faith of his or her own people. This is done by giving aid or assistance to the enemy of your own people. That's what a traitor is. Oh, it's deep, y'all. Because in the process of giving aid or assistance to the enemy of your people, you become an enemy of your own people. Come on, that's right. Go ahead, sir. Oh, this thing gets deep. Take your time. A traitor is a treacherous person. Let me tell you why they're treacherous. Because a traitor is a person who has the ability of making you think that they're with you. A traitor is a person who has the ability of making you think, making it appear as though they are in support of the program. Oh, shucks. A traitor is one that makes you think that you can count on them. But in reality, traitor is the one who covertly, that's the word we use in military intelligence, who covertly, which means underhandedly, or in secret, they try to subvert the strength and program of the struggle. The most dangerous characteristic about the traitor is that they're sometimes hard to detect. Y'all following me? You see, most people look right at the traitor and don't see them for what they are. You know why? Because the traitor looks like us. The traitor sounds like us. The traitor dresses like us. Traitor sings like us. Traitor gives money like us. Traitor gets happy like us. In fact, y'all, the traitor might even carry a Hosea and a Bible like us. But the traitor has no real interest in learning or in developing themselves or in preparing themselves for the war. Y'all follow me? That their own people are engaged in. The only real concern of the traitor is something called personal recognition or payment of some kind. When it comes to the warfare, brothers and sisters, of African liberation or salvation, the traitor is what I call a Negro. Go ahead. Now, according to Webster's dictionary, which has become the platform of Eurocentric definitions and word meanings, a Negro, check out what Webster says now, a Negro is a black person. A member of the dominant group of mankind in Africa. According to Webster, a Negro is one who is characterized by dark skin. Well, I got a problem with that definition. Because what I just read fits every last one of us in this room. And I'm not a Negro. And you, some of you, are not Negroes. Some of you are Negroes. And I'm going to tell you how that happened. If y'all don't mind, I would like to exercise the authority of the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa. And I'd like to reach into those 7 principles and grab one word pronounced Kujichagulia, which means self-determination. The reason why I want to do this, y'all, is because Kujichagulia says that we must define ourselves. We must name ourselves. We must create for ourselves and speak for ourselves instead of being defined, named, and created for and spoken for by others. So if I can exercise the principle of Kujichagulia, let me define for you what a Negro is. Instead of listening to this white man named Webster. Let us black folk determine what is a Negro. A Negro, now this is Ray Hagins' definition, you don't have to accept it, but it's the best I can come up with. A Negro is a non-person, N-O-N dash person. A Negro is a body without a mind. A Negro is an empty shell that has been programmed to destroy its own kind. A Negro is anything that would destroy the fostering of African liberation. A Negro has no idea what or who they are. And because they suffer from low self-esteem and a lack of self-awareness, they will do anything to be recognized and accepted by others, even their own enemy. Well, where did Negroes come from? How did Negroes come into being? I have to tell y'all the truth. We weren't always like we are. I looked at other people, other nationalities, and I've seen, maybe you've seen it too, I've seen a group, a few people from another ethnic group come into town, and they all pitched in and moved into a big apartment, and through nepotism they saved up their money, and then a few years later they all went and bought their own house. I've seen ethnic groups come into town and through cooperative economics, in a matter of 15 or 20 years, they own an 8-block radius of homes and stores and markets. And I say, Lord, what's wrong with my folk? We've been here longer than any other ethnic group, and yet we have less than any other ethnic group. Why is that? An African Holy Ghost said to me, because of Negroes. Let me tell you how this happened. Everybody say psychological and social engineering. Now, follow what I'm saying. I'm going to try to paint this picture for you. everybody comes to this country from their country. And when they come here, they bring with them their own language. They bring with them their own style of dress. They come here with family traditions. They come here from their land with memories of what it was like in the homeland. They come here with a strong culture and a spiritual and personal identity to build upon. Everybody that comes here, every immigrant that comes here with the things I just named. Always remember, brothers and sisters, and hear me good, always, don't ever forget this. The founding fathers, what did I just say? The founding fathers. The founding fathers, by the way, who were our slave masters. Right. Now see, children, when y'all read about the founding fathers in school, let the teacher know that yes, our pastor told us that they were our slave masters. You tell the teacher that, okay? The founding fathers, who were our slave masters, never intended for the Africans that they imported by force to develop their own stable communities based on our African cultural traditions. Please understand that. What America and other European colonies created and sought to maintain was a permanent working class of people who would always be subjugated to them. Did y'all hear what I said? I don't care how much and how loud you holler their Jesus. They still want you subjugated to them, and they still want you working for and serving them, because that's the only acceptable place for you in their mind. Commercial investors, wealthy landowners, and colonial governments combined their forces to suppress any possibility of Africans ever becoming a dominant force in the land. Come on, son. Go ahead. Why did they do this? Because if we ever became a dominant force in the land, one day we just might bring retribution and judgment on them for how they treated our great-grandparents. Listen, brothers and sisters, in order for the slave trade to be profitable back then, and for white supremacy to exist today, repeat this after me. All resistance to the system of racism had to be and must be crushed. Did you digest that yet? Their program cannot prosper unless they crush every bit of resistance against supremacy of the white race. So the only way they could crush resistance is to make Negroes. Follow this now. You see, it was too risky to have a Moor walking around. Too risky to have a Mandinka walking around. Too risky to have a Hausa or a Fulani walking around. It was too risky to have a Senegalese or a Sudanese or an Abyssinian walking around knowing who they are. They couldn't have that. They could not risk having an African African who was the son of a university professor.
Come on, preacher. Come on.
They could not, nor can they today, risk having an African who is the daughter of a high African government official walking around knowing who she is. Those who captured our people and sold our people and owned our people were very calculating and methodical in how to survive. Let's make Negroes out of these Africans. Look at the person next to you and say, there is a difference between an African and a Negro. Well, what was the process? The first thing that had to be done in changing the African into a Negro was they had to remove all signs of personal identification.
That's right.
Y'all with me?
Yes.
When Africans were brought to this country, guess what, y'all? They were stripped of their clothes and something else. Their heads were shaved. Sounds a little familiar if any one of you been in the military. I remember my first night in Marine Corps boot camp. When I stepped off that gray dog, we got about 2 hours of sleep, and the next morning, first thing they did to us was stripped us of our clothing and shaved all our hair off. And anything that we had, rings or anything, that gave us an awareness of what we were before we got here, they took it from us. And then they turned around and told every last one of us, whatever color you were, you're no longer that. The color you are now is green. Am I telling y'all know what I'm talking about? And they'd walk up to you and say, what color are you, recruit? And like a fool, I stood there and said, green, sir. What are you? Instead of saying an African warrior, I stood there and said, a little green amphibious monster. That's their way. The reason that they do this is that's their way of removing all indications of a national affiliation, removing any indication of an individual status. Whatever you were, you no longer was that. And this was their way of removing a person's personal style. Y'all remember Roots? Yes. With Kunta Kinte? A little warrior prince, and they would not stop until they broke him and made him say, my name is Toby, sir. Today, brothers and sisters, this same European program is being promoted in the minds of our children. Yes. Let me tell you how it's happening. You know, what they do now in school is they give false impressions of our children and Africans by showing them pictures in their school books of Africans who ain't got no clothes on. Come on, people, we dressed in fine robes. We dressed in royalty and gold and headdresses. And some of you black, beautiful women still do it because y'all put these hats on. Because, you see, that's your genetic memory bank talking to y'all, saying, let me put on this awesome hat. Because, see, that comes from Africa. But the pictures they show our children in school is giving a false impression of Africans of not having on any clothes and being civilized by white folk who are fully dressed. The pictures and images that they show are little black Africans walking around and running through the bushes with a piece of cloth covering their genitalia and a ring in their nose and a spear in their hand, running around grass huts. While, of course, the white professor is the one who has come to give us an education and civilize us. The next step, by the way, I'm reminded of an African who, from the Dahomey tribe, who was captured and forced to walk hundreds of miles to the coast. He survived a long journey and the slave ship which was bound for Brazil, where he was sold to a plantation owner. Guess what this African did? He became despondent. He became despondent because he was an awesome brother in his homeland, but now he's nothing. He can't communicate to anybody. He walks around in chains, and he became so despondent that he began drinking alcohol. Now, this is old, but it still happens today. He escaped from the plantation, but was recaptured and, of course, beaten many, many, many times. He became suicidal, and he developed the mentality of becoming unstable. He escaped to New York and was imprisoned there. He became more confused and more depressed and resorted more to alcoholism, and his owners took him to Mississippi. And in Mississippi, he was introduced to a man named Pastor William Wilson of the Baptist Free Mission Society. And Pastor Wilson convinced this African man that his problems stemmed from his heathen African religion. And if he wanted to be set free, he had to forsake his Africanness and take on Jesus Christ and be baptized. And of course, the brother said, all right. He was baptized, and he thought he had it made now. And how many of y'all have made that step of coming into the church, and you got baptized, and you came up and went through the ritual, and you thought it was all going to be all right, only to find out a few weeks later ain't nothing changed? I'm still just another N-I-G-G-E-R. Why are we afraid to say the word nigger? In the minds of the system, that's all you are. Ask Jesse, he'll tell you. The next step in making Negroes out of Africans, check this now, was to separate Africans from other Africans who spoke the same language. Y'all following this program? The purpose for this was to prevent Africans from communicating with each other and plotting with each other on what they needed to do to overcome this oppressor. If they couldn't communicate with each other, then they couldn't accomplish much. Yeah, buddy. And the African who had just arrived in America found English or Spanish or French or Dutch or Portuguese being spoken by other African slaves, and immediately he felt like an alien to his own people. That's the program. Woo, buddy, African languages were forbidden, or you get beat real bad if you spoke in your native tongue. And the drum that was the spiritual heartbeat of our people, were taken away, and they couldn't even communicate with the drums. Our slave masters often mocked the language of the slaves and pointed out because they couldn't understand each other, see how you dumb Africans are. As a result of outlawing teaching, the slave couldn't learn how to read or write. Now mind you, y'all, I don't want you to think for one moment that Africans who were brought here couldn't read or write. Did y'all hear what I said? See, the way they teach it to our children in history class, it's like slaves didn't know how to read or write. Slaves didn't know how to read or write English. Please understand that. Oh, they could read and they could write, for they brought over here, let me tell y'all something. The first people that they took as slaves were the teachers, the leaders, the spiritual people. So they knew how to read and write, but they had to break them first. Oh man. As a result of going through this, slaveholders were able to convince many American-born slaves. Everybody say American-born slaves. American-born slaves. Now see, that's the difference, y'all. Once they're American-born slaves, the slave master was able to teach them that Negroes were really dumb. You follow what I'm saying? Because they were born under the slave master's venue. The next step in making a Negro was to instill, now follow this psychology here, was to instill such an overwhelming fear of the white man that the black slave dared not rebel. The fear of whites was so deeply impressed in the minds of the black slave that even black slave mothers programmed their children to be a good and obedient slave. Black slave mothers would tell their children, whatever you do, don't make massa mad at you. Y'all follow this thing here? They were not, mind you, they were only trying to protect their children. That's all they were trying to do. But in the process of that woman trying to protect her child from suffering horrible whippings and even sometimes being put to death, in the process of trying to protect that child, many of them extinguished or killed the warrior spirit, especially in their male children. And guess what, y'all? To this day, many black women still do the same thing. Many of them say, now listen, don't you ever forget, this is the white man's world. And you got to play by his rules, boy. Oh, that's what people are hearing today. The warrior spirit in the children of slaves was broken early as a means of protecting against later punishment. The next step, y'all see these steps here? Yeah. The next step in making a Negro was the separation of family members. Yeah. Oh, this thing gets real serious here, y'all. Imagine, if you can, parents, imagine somebody busting into your sleeping quarters and snatching your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old child from you. And you know that when they take them through that door, you're never going to see your child again. Try to imagine what that might be like. See, y'all can't even think on that level. Imagine what it might be like for a man to be with his wife And the slave master would bust through the door and snatch his wife and rape her, while another slave headman would hold a shotgun to the neck of that man. Can you imagine what that must have been like? Being sold away, or watching family members being sold away, was a devastating experience. And guess what, y'all? The psychohistory, we're still living it as a people. Many slaves became so overcome with grief that they went insane or suicidal. Now follow this program. The slave master knew, once I snatch your child from you. Now I'm going to see if y'all can apply it to today. The slave master knew, once I snatch your child from you, their upbringing will no longer be under your supervision. You got this? Guess what, y'all? It's still going on today. They're just not breaking in your house. Okay? Because of economic pressure and you trying to make ends meet. You're so busy working to pay the bills. Your child still ain't under your supervision. 8 hours of the day, he's under someone else's supervision. We call it school. When your child gets out of school, you're not around, parent. Hello? So what does this child do now? Who is this child getting cultural, spiritual development from? Television. Pokemon videos. PlayStation. Or either they're involved in some kind of government program to monitor your children until you get off work. And of course, guess what happens? By the time that child is 11 years old, there's no attachment between you and your child because another entity was its parent. Nobody to pass on or pass down the knowledge of African traditions. Y'all tired of hearing this? Okay, I'm trying to help you understand how an African became a Negro. See this process. And it's really deep, y'all, because when the importation of Africans became outlawed, this had a tremendous development on black American culture. For you see, without any new Africans coming over now, follow this now, to reinforce the African culture in the minds of the slaves, what happened? American-born slaves grew more and more alienated from African consciousness. Is this making sense to you? White slave masters were able to create the most repulsive image of Africa, which black slaves had no choice but to accept. The process of separating African children from their parents and teaching them to despise their heritage is something that we need to start looking real close at, y'all. Like I said, it's going on today. The next step, oh, y'all gonna get a little upset on this one now, but the next step in making a Negro was making sex a tool for power and control. Yes. Now y'all, check this out. How many of y'all have heard sisters say, brothers ain't no good? Yes. Now maybe y'all ain't heard them say that, I don't know. Maybe you've heard women say men are dogs. All that kind of stuff. Well, let me tell you what happened in making the African male warrior an Americanized Negro. You see, brothers and sisters, Africans have always held the seriousness of marriage close to them. There was nothing as important as the home when it comes to Africans. But over here, Lord have mercy, African slaves always lived with the reality that their marriage couldn't be held sacred or taken seriously. For you see, at any moment, one could be sold away, or the master, as I said, can come and snatch his wife and show who really holds the power. You see, here's how this works. During slavery, big, strong, black African men and women were matched up. They didn't have no feelings for each other. There was no love involved here. See, that's why the sister came out with the song and said, what's love got to do with this? Love had nothing to do with it. The slave master would take this big, strong black woman and this big, strong black man and make them have sex with each other. Not for anything other than the fact that he knew a big, strong baby would come from their union, and that would bring him some more money. Therefore, a monogamous family life was unrealistic to the black slave. Even, check this out, y'all, even white men were paid as high as $20, which back then was good money now, were paid as high as $20 for each Negro woman that they got pregnant. Robust white college students were even invited to spend their vacations on the plantations and turned loose among the slave cabins at night in order to secure mulatto children. Slave masters made their female slaves submit to being impregnated by white men and punish those that resisted. Black male slaves felt powerless. I don't know if y'all can tap into this pathology that I'm telling you here. The black male slaves felt powerless when they saw how the white men, merely by the power of their whiteness, could sexually abuse any black woman that they desired, and the black slave male couldn't do anything about it. And guess what, y'all? We're still dealing with that psychohistory today. This created a hostile relationship between the black and white man. And it still exists today. Have you ever heard of a person who's trying to deal with a problem, and instead of going back and dealing with the history of the problem, they're trying to address it now? Look at the person next to you and say, you can't address the now until you address the past. Some of you sitting here right now, you are scarred and wounded now because of something that happened in your past, and some of you got this thing in your head, just turn it over to Jesus. And you've been turning it over for 20 years and you're still scarred. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Look at the person next to you and say, deal with it. I'm a psychotherapist. I know what I'm talking about. People come in my office trying to act, oh, hallelujah, thank you, Lord, hallelujah. I said, sit down. Sit down. Let's get to the nitty-gritty. Don't come in here with that stuff. Shucks. If that was working, you wouldn't have made the appointment. Shucks. We got to deal with what happened. The rape of African women served as an important means of mind control. Follow this, brothers and sisters. Forced sexual relations with white slave masters had the effect of destroying the black woman's self-esteem. Made her feel like she wasn't worth nothing. Many female slaves had to learn how to play the game in order to survive and get better treatment from her slave master. And guess what? It still goes on today. Because of her body, she would get better food. Because of what she would do with her body, she would get better clothing. Because of what she'd do with her body, she'd get better living conditions as the master's concubine. And many female slaves concluded that the enslaved black man, oh shucks now, as loving as he might be, and as gentle as he might be, and as strong of a man as he might be, they concluded that that black man cannot offer me the protection that I need from this white slave master. So to the black man, the sexual relationship between the white slave master and his black sister seemed to confirm his own weakness. Do y'all see this thing? Made him feel inferior. Made him feel like he wasn't worth nothing. So guess how the black man developed self-esteem on the plantation? By becoming a stud. Oh, some of y'all don't want to hear this. But you've got to hear the historicity of how many of our people became Negroes. The only way that the African male could prove his virility and his ability to father children was as a highly prized stud. Sometimes black male slaves, mandinkas, were literally hired out to other plantations just for the purpose of going in and impregnating other female slaves. He felt nothing for them. The only thing he felt was the recognition and a pat on the back from the slave master, and maybe some meat and some cornbread and some greens, maybe a good meal, because he used that thing between his legs to get positive recognition. And guess what? It still goes on today. Oh, you don't have to like it. It's tight, but it's right. Since the black male had nothing else to be proud of, in their state of powerlessness, their sexual performance became a means whereby he could gain some kind of social status. And that's why right now the psychohistory in our genetic memory banks got many of our brothers standing on the street corner holding themselves. That's the only thing of value they got. And they stand there. They ain't moving that other hand. Can I talk real, y'all? instances when white women found black male slaves attractive. White women. Poor white women who owned no slaves sometimes developed intimate relations with black males, and in some cases tried to marry many free blacks. But I want y'all to understand something. The white community didn't tolerate that. Many laws were passed. In fact, y'all, let me refer to one. A white woman who tried to marry a black man was put in prison in Pennsylvania because the Pennsylvania laws of 1725 and 26 states, and I quote, if a free Negro man or woman married a white person, that Negro was to be sold by the justices for the quarter sessions as a slave for the rest of their life. For a white person, offending, the penalty was 7 years servitude and a fine of 30 pounds of silver. If the offense was fornication or adultery, the free Negro was to be sold as a servant for 7 years. The guilty white person was to be whipped or imprisoned and branded with the letter A in their chest to represent adulterer. That's Pennsylvania law, 1725. In other words, isn't that deep? The white slave master could come in and rape black women whenever he got ready. But you let a black man try to look at a white woman, they want to lock him up. Or lynch him or kill him. Actually pass laws against that. Ain't that deep? The next step in making a Negro was the color system. I'm running out of time. Got to do this faster. The children who were born from the pregnancies by white slave masters and other white men looked different from everybody else. And now, what was the thing with that? Their presence, that child's presence, was to be a permanent reminder of who holds the power here. All this stuff is deep, y'all. Yes. The very presence of a permanent reminder of the conquest of the African people by whites. The impregnation of black female slaves by the white slave master was a deliberate, calculated act which had a lot of benefits for the owner. The first benefit was the slave owner, his sons, or the hired white overseers who impregnated the slave girl. Well, they were patted on the back and paid because the plantation gained a new slave at no cost to the slave owner. The second thing was it created a class of half white and half black slaves, which often became the preferred group of house servants. You see, the light-skinned women would serve as house slaves and concubines, while the dark ones had to work the field. And guess what, y'all? It's still going on today. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research. Think for a moment. If you notice, just about all of the leaders of black organizations are light-skinned. Think about it. Think about it. Why is that? Why is it that our leaders and blacks who get to prominent positions like Colin Powell? Come on, yeah. What's this man play golf? What's the brother who's the head of the NAACP? Kwasi Fume. I mean, you know, it's deep. If you notice, all of our leaders of any reputability are fair-skinned, medium to fair-skinned people. Why don't they put some, brothers that look like Mentuhotep? Why don't you put somebody up there like that? Wrong image, brother. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And 3, it enabled the white slave masters to create a slave hierarchy as a means of preventing uprisings. In other words, the mixed race house servants and overseers, who were many times the slave master's own offspring, helped to maintain control on the white plantation. And we saw that in the movie Sankofa. Some of them identified so much with the master that they reported all acts of disobedience or rebellion to the slave master, thereby earning for themselves a greater position of trust and authority. You see, y'all, the color caste system measured the degrees of whiteness upon which rested the slave's social status. Let me break it down for you. First, there was the mulatto. The mulatto was half white and half black. Y'all follow me? Then there was the quadroon. The quadroon was 1/4 black, offspring of a white man and a mulatto. Then there was the octoroon, which was 1/8 black. He was the offspring of a white and a quadroon. And then, of course, the highest was the octoroon. Oh, this thing is deep, y'all. The next and very important step in making a Negro was to force the slaves, get ready for this one now, was to force the slaves to convert to Christianity. Africans were forced to change their original names to European Christian names. This destroyed the cultural, economic, and religious affiliations with specific nations in Africa. The need to convert heathen Africans. Notice how I said that, because that's what they call. See, you got to understand, they called the Africans heathen. Now that's what you call God. Because the word heathen is the Hebrew word out of the Bible, goy, and the Greek word ethnos. And both of them mean pagan people from the northern hemisphere who do not serve the true and living God. Now, who lives in the northern hemisphere? Thank you. And there's something they called Africans heathens. But you know what? They had to do that because they used that to justify the slave trade. Once African slaves were converted to Christianity, they became more manageable. Why is that, y'all? Why is that? Why is it that if we become Christians, we become more manageable? Why is that? Y'all help me with that one. You know what's deep about it? We become Christians and we become more manageable to the white man, but yet we take out our wrath on each other. Y'all help me understand that. Help me understand that. We become Christians and talk about each other like I don't know what. And walk right up to our oppressor and say, yes, how you doing today? Help me understand that. Christianity became a political tool to control the slaves and protect the business interests of those who were involved in the slave trade. The last step, y'all, in making a good Negro was to convince the next generation of Africans, that those born as slaves in America, that it was better to forget a shameful African past. As a result of not being able to speak or learn any other language than the slave master's language, the children of those first imported Africans were kept ignorant of all that their people had ever been. Sometimes sold away from their parents as young children. The only image that they had of Africa was the one created by their slave masters, which was a young, naked jungle savage. with a bone in his nose. Newly imported Africans just coming out of the holds of these slave ships with their bruised and beaten bodies covered with open sores and a state of shock, rage, and despair. Hardly in the position to give a sophisticated presentation of their cultural land. And when those slaves who were American born saw these Africans come off the slave ships, hadn't washed, smelling with fecal matter, bruised, diseased, can you imagine what kind of image they felt about Africa? Instead of having an appreciation for their homeland, they said, this is what Africans look like. This is what Africans are. And then you can understand the psychopathology that would cause American-born slaves to say, I don't want to have nothing to do with Africa. And you know what, y'all? It still goes on today. Because whites painted Africa in the minds of American-born slaves as a place where cannibals ate human flesh. No Africans ever ate no human flesh. I'll say it again. No Africans ate human flesh. The only cannibals were the folk that lived up in the mountains. Caucasus Mountains. White slave master told American-born slaves that Africans were ape-like people who put rings through their noses and swung through trees, where gorilla-faced men and women wore only tiny cloths to cover their bodies. The words African and savage became synonymous. And the word civilized and white became synonymous. So American-born slaves saw civilized people as white people. And they saw savages as African people. And that's why right now I'm having a hard time trying to get Africans here in St. Louis to identify and be proud to say, I'm an African. Because that mentality. Now, why is that so hard for you to understand? You accepted their doctrine that you're a sinner because of what Adam did. All right. Now, if you ain't got no problem being a sinner because of what Adam did, you ought to be able to understand why you're ashamed of Africa because of what the slave masters did. I'm closing now, but you can look at the person next to you if you're not ashamed to say it and say, you know what? I'm proud to be an African. I thank God I'm an African. Be free until you first know who you are. Oh, yeah. I'm proud to be an African. So get rid of that. I know they made some of us Negroes. But now that you've heard how we became Negroes, get rid of that Negro mind. And be born again.